there's still certain areas and there are still certain circumstances where children can't go in hospitals, right? But it's a whole lot freer than it was when I was a little kid. My first memory of that probably when my grandmother was in the hospital and we had to stay down in the lobby downstairs. And that was as far as we could go. That was it. I think you had to be 13 and could even go on to a room. Couldn't stand that. You know. There were reasons, and now the reasoning is just a little bit different on healing process and how that goes along with attitude and visitors help, all that kind of thing. But here in this situation, you know, they're looking at the people, and when Jesus, verse 14, when Jesus saw this, he was indignant. Jesus didn't like this at all. He said to them, "Let the children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." And he took the children in his arms, he put his hands on them, and blessed them. Jesus wasn't afraid to touch the kids. He wanted the people to be bringing the kids to him. I mean, that's hopefully our goal, is to bring kids to Jesus. That's what he wanted. He was upset when they weren't letting it happen. They thought that this is a situation, this is for adults. You know, the kids aren't going to understand anyway. This is for adults. Stop bothering Jesus. It wasn't bothering Jesus, and on the total opposite, it's exactly what he wanted. And so when we look at these passages, and we're going to look at two, and some of these overlap because you do have parallel passages, and sometimes I can be guilty of saying, you know, this gospel, you know, records the same thing that this other gospel does, so we're just going to read this one. Well, it was written more than once. And so let's look at it, even though some of these will overlap. Go back to Matthew chapter 18. Matthew 18. I think we need to read from each one because there's little bits of information one may include that the other one won't. But Matthew 18, beginning in verse 1. Says, "At that time the disciples came to Jesus and asked, 'Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?'" Now this time they're approaching the subject directly with him. Who's the greatest kingdom of heaven? He called a little child and had him stand among them. And he said, "I tell you the truth, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven." All right, here Jesus uses the word humble. He is letting them know what he's talking about when he says become like a little child. He's not talking about, we would use the term childish. I mean, Paul even in Corinthians, you know, talks about when you grow up, you put away childish ways. And so that's not what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about the humility that is there in a child. That when you take care of a child, if you're supplying for them, if you're feeding them, if you're making sure they have a bed at night, all those things, do you always get a thank you? No. Why? Because they realize, I can't do this myself. You know, this is supposed to happen. Somebody's supposed to take care of me. There's a humility there. Sometimes we lack that and we think, no, I can take myself, right? And we maybe don't want help from somebody else. And it might go as far as we don't think we need help from God. We can handle this. There's probably all kinds of application here, but Jesus says, unless you humble yourself as a little child, become teachable, be willing to receive the help that you need, then you can enter the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes, verse 5, welcomes a little child like this in my name welcomes me. But if anyone causes one of these little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for him to have a large millstone hung around his neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to sin. Such things must come, but woe to the man through whom they come. Jesus is letting them know that these children, and we've already seen the circumstances, in one particular case at least, they were saying, stop bringing your kids, leave Jesus alone. That if you do not welcome the children, you're not welcoming Him. Because He says, if you welcome the children, it's welcoming me. Another passage for us to look at is in the 19th chapter. We're already in Matthew. Turn to chapter 19. And if you look at verse 13. Then little children were brought to Jesus for Him to place His hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples rebuked those who brought them. Jesus said to little children, come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. When He had placed His hands on them, He went on from there. In Luke, if you want to turn over to the Gospel of Luke, in chapter 18. Chapter 18 of Luke, verse 15, people were also bringing babies to Jesus to have Him touch them. When the disciples saw this, they rebuked them. But Jesus called the children to Him and said, let the little children come to me and do not hinder them. The kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it. Again, some of the overlap that is there, in this particular case, even saying babies. And so we could reason, there's no need for Jesus to have to spend the time. He's teaching people. There's no need for Jesus to have to spend the time touching babies. I mean, can the baby believe anyway? You see how we might be able to reason in minds? Jesus says, leave them alone. They're mine. Of such as these is the kingdom of heaven. There's innocence here. Sometimes recognizing the importance of children and the importance of how we react to them can slip away. I know that those who have been here recognize that we've not too long ago looked at the statements of Joshua and then going to Judges and how there arose a generation who did not know God. And the connection that must have to some degree with the raising of children and letting them know who God is and the continuance of showing them God's activity among us. All of these things and the importance of doing that. Kids approach things from a different mindset, don't they? And sometimes it's just simply a misunderstanding. I know I was doing a little bit of reading on this and just read one thing. It was kind of comical about the two boys that were constantly getting in trouble, but they the teacher was trying to teach them, and the one boy was in class, and the teacher said, just asked the question, where is God? And the boy was kind of put his head down, and he looked at the table, and he looked out the window. He just jumped up and out and ran to the other boy, and he said, we're in trouble. God's missing, and we did. But kids, and spending a week at camp, even with high schoolers, but then going out there at other times and being with them, you go from the younger ones to the older ones, and recognizing they view things differently. But there's an openness. as much as we have the desire to tell kids, little kids, even right on up through the teens, CIY and camp and the event at Ozark Christian and Getaway, and all of these things that we would do with the teens right down through to the little kids as we're doing with VBS, all of these things to try to show them God, to try to show them Jesus. In the midst of that, let's also realize while we're teaching them, while we're doing what we can to bring them to Jesus, let's watch them. Let's observe them. Let's recognize that of such is the kingdom of heaven, and that's how we need to be, because that's what Jesus did with them. You really don't, when they brought the kids to Jesus, we don't read anything about what Jesus starts telling them about God. Did you hear that in any of those passages? But Jesus brought the kids and He used them for the example. Not His disciples, not even Himself. He used the kids He set the kids in front and put His arms around them and He said, you see this? This is what you need to be like. So maybe for VBS coming up, let's look at the kids. Let's let them teach us something. If you're here this morning, this was very different. But you may realize, I've not been teachable. I've resisted. I have thought, I can take care of this myself. Well, you can't. And that's what we're looking at in these passages is the adults were really messing up. They were arguing about who was greatest. They were trying to put themselves above somebody else. Jesus never condemned being great, but He wasn't keen on trying to be greater than somebody else. You want to be great?
Not to throw you off course, but let's recognize the teachers. You say it's tough, these kids here are
Any teachers here who have taught the kids here? Yeah, stand up. Thank you. Thank you, Art. Your response. It may be public to come here and say, I need to let Jesus help me. It may be just you praying right where you're at, or coming here and just praying, just letting people know, I'm praying about this and I need help. But I know there's one of us that couldn't say, I can do better at this. So while we teach the kids, let's learn something from them. If you need to respond to that, come as we stand.